She lived in one of London's quietest suburbs, a residential street in Southall, where neighbors exchanged pleasantries and families passed generations under one roof. From the outside, everything appeared ordinary, respectable, safe. Samira Nazir was the kind of daughter any family would be proud to raise in Britain. Born in the UK, fluent in both English and Urdu, ambitious, educated, and perfectly poised to bridge two worlds, heritage and modernity. Samira was every bit the image of success. She was sharp, professionally accomplished, and carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew what she wanted in life. Behind the counter at her family's business, she was polite and graceful. At the recruitment firm where she served as a director, she was admired for her leadership and vision. But while her future sparkled in plain sight, behind the doors of her family home, something else was quietly growing, unseen, unspoken, and to her family, unforgivable. She had a secret, not a secret of shame or wrongdoing, not rebellion or recklessness, but love. A love that crossed borders, caste lines, and expectations. A love that didn't seek approval, it simply asked for acceptance. And when Samira finally summoned the courage to speak her truth, to introduce the man she had chosen, a man she hoped her family would see through her eyes, they didn't just reject her, they revolted. This is not simply a story of a life cut short. This is the case of Samira Nazir. Welcome to the crime series. Before we begin, do us a quick favor. Drop your location and the time you're watching this in the comments. We want to know where you're tuning in from, because these stories matter everywhere. Like this video, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a case. In the heart of Southall, West London, a vibrant borough often called Little Punjab for its rich South Asian roots, life bustled with color, tradition, and familiarity. It was a place where immigrant families found community, where old customs lived on through generations, and where honor, reputation, and family name still carried immense weight. Among the many families living quietly and respectfully in its terraced streets was the Nazir family. Well-known, well-respected, and on the surface, the picture of successful integration. Inside this tight-knit enclave, a young woman named Samira Nazir lived a life that appeared enviable from the outside. British-born, fluent in English, intelligent, and socially poised, she was, in many ways, the embodiment of everything her parents had hoped to achieve by emigrating from Pakistan decades earlier. By day, Samira was the face of upward mobility. A confident professional woman navigating the corridors of higher education and career advancement. She dressed in tailored office wear, carried herself with quiet dignity, and could converse with ease in both business meetings and cultural gatherings. She was admired not only for her beauty, but for her sharp intellect, her ambition, and her poise. But behind the doors of her family home, Samira was living a silent contradiction, a tug-of-war between two identities she had been trying to reconcile since adolescence. One foot was planted firmly in the world she was born into, British, modern, and independent. The other remained in the world her parents had brought with them from Pakistan, a world where family reputation came before personal happiness, where a daughter's decisions were guided by honor, and where marriage was not so much a matter of the heart as it was a contract between families, faith, and culture. Samira was born in 1979 in the United Kingdom to Pakistani parents who had settled in Britain in pursuit of a better future. They brought with them deep-rooted traditions, strong community values, and a fierce sense of pride in their heritage. Her father, Samira Nazir, was a well-established businessman in the Southall area. He ran the family-owned Rana Brothers grocery store on Southall Broadway, a local fixture known not just for its South Asian produce, but for the influence its owners held in the community. Her older brother, also named Azar, worked in the store and often represented the family in social settings. The Nazirs were considered a model family, financially stable and socially involved. From a young age, Samira showed signs of exceptional promise. She was naturally curious, academically strong, and socially graceful. Teachers praised her, friends gravitated toward her, and elders often remarked on her good manners and respectfulness. She pursued higher education with a determination that set her apart. She studied travel and tourism at Thames Valley University, an unusual but bold choice for a young woman in her community, and went on to become a director at her family's recruitment firm, Premier Personnel. It was a position that not only reflected her capability, but also her family's trust in her professional judgment. She had managed to earn authority without visibly challenging tradition, or so it seemed. Because in truth, Samira was walking a razor's edge. Every success she achieved outside the home was met with the unspoken expectation that it must never conflict with the rules inside the home. Her family allowed her professional independence, but personal freedom, especially regarding relationships, remained off-limits. In her parents' eyes, she was still expected to fulfill her duty as a daughter, to marry a man they approved of, from their caste and background, and to do so quietly, respectfully, and without protest. Any deviation from this was seen not just as disobedience, but as betrayal. Over the years, Samira had been introduced to several suitors, men carefully selected by her family, often from Pakistan, with the expectation that she would agree to an arranged marriage. Twice she had been pressured to consider proposals, and twice she had gently but firmly declined. Each time her refusal was met with disappointment, anger, and increasing tension at home. Her father saw it as defiance. Her brother took it personally. Her mother, though less vocal, rarely offered support. What to Samira was a deeply personal choice. To wait for someone she loved was to her family a source of shame. In their eyes, her hesitation jeopardized their standing in the community. What made matters more difficult was that Samira was not outwardly rebellious. She wasn't confrontational or disrespectful. She didn't dress provocatively or flaunt her independence. Her resistance came quietly, in withheld consent, in delayed decisions, in thoughtful silences. But even silence, in a household built on obedience, could be perceived as war. And yet Samira held on to hope. She believed, like many daughters in her position, that her family might eventually soften, that if she worked hard enough, waited patiently enough, and proved her worth, they might come to respect her right to choose her own path. She wanted love, but she didn't want to lose her family to find it. It was this impossible tension, between duty and desire, between heritage and heart, that defined Samira's inner world. Around the early 2000s, Samira Nazir met a man who would change the course of her life. Salman Mohammed. At first glance, their paths may have seemed worlds apart. Samira, the daughter of Pakistani immigrants, was born and raised in the UK, educated, ambitious, and deeply embedded in the rhythms of British society. Salman, on the other hand, was a newcomer, a young man from Afghanistan who had fled his war-torn homeland in search of peace, stability, and a new beginning. Salman arrived in the UK in 2000. One of many asylum seekers escaping the political upheaval that ravaged Afghanistan during the late 1990s and early 2000s. He came with little more than hope and resilience. Alone, far from home, and unfamiliar with the language and culture of his new surroundings, he carried himself with humility. Determined to carve out a life in a foreign land, he accepted whatever work he could find. Through a connection arranged by Samira's brother, Salman found employment at one of the Nazir family's grocery shops, a humble yet vital post that placed him, by chance or fate, within Samira's orbit. Their early interactions were brief, shared moments behind counters and shelves, conversations that lingered longer than they should have, in a place where eyes always watched. But something in Salman's manner set him apart. He was quiet, observant, and respectful. He didn't speak in grand gestures or act with bravado. His humility, gentleness, and grounded nature stood in stark contrast to the suitors Samira had previously been presented with, many of whom came from Pakistan with expectations but no understanding of her world. Salman didn't treat Samira like a bargaining chip in a family negotiation. He listened to her. He spoke to her as an equal, and in a life where so much of her existence was dictated by others, what to wear, whom to marry, how to behave, this alone was revolutionary. Their connection grew slowly, then with urgency. They found time and space away from the scrutinizing eyes of family and community. Walks in parks, meetings in quiet corners of the city, secret calls and messages sent late at night. They learned each other's fears, dreams, and the delicate balance they would need to maintain in order to stay together. It wasn't just attraction. It was a meeting of souls who understood what it meant to feel boxed in by circumstance and expectation. For Samira, Salman was more than a romantic partner. He represented something sacred, choice. In a world where so much had been planned for her, here was someone she had chosen freely. He wasn't rich, he wasn't well connected, but he was kind, and in her eyes, that was worth more than any marriage proposal arranged by distant relatives in Pakistan. But the love they nurtured was not just private. It was dangerous. In households where honor is sacred and reputation is guarded like treasure, love outside of caste, nationality, or parental approval is not just discouraged, it is forbidden. For years, Samira had been presented with suitors approved by her family, men who fit the mold, upheld tradition, and were seen as safe bets to preserve the Nazir family's standing in their community. Twice she had resisted arranged marriages, and twice she had been met with disappointment and simmering anger from her father and older brother. Still, she had held her ground. And so in March 2005, Samira made the boldest decision of her life. She brought Salman home. She introduced him to her family, not just as a friend or colleague, but as the man she wanted to marry. A man she had chosen without their approval. A man she hoped they might, in time, come to accept. But what she envisioned as a plea for understanding turned into a confrontation unlike any she had ever faced. Her father, Samira Nazir Sr., erupted with fury. Azar did not merely express disapproval. He brandished a knife and threatened Salman's life. There was no room for negotiation, no chance for conversation. Samira's attempt to bridge two worlds, to create a space where her personal happiness could coexist with her family's values, was violently rejected. Salman was forced to flee the house under threat, shaken and humiliated. For him, the message was clear. He was not welcome. Not because of who he was as a person, but because of what he represented. An outsider, a refugee, a man without a name that carried weight in their community. His presence threatened the family's image, their sense of control, and their idea of honor. For Samira, the confrontation left deeper scars. She had chosen honesty. She had chosen to face her family with transparency and hope. And in return, she was met with rage. What followed wasn't a period of calm or quiet reflection. It was escalation, a silent declaration of war within her own home. Her family now knew the truth, and their response would set into motion a chain of events that would end in bloodshed. This was no longer about disapproval. It was about restoring what they saw as order. And Samira's love, once her refuge, had now made her a target. Once Salman was out of the picture, the focus turned to Samira. She was subjected to a barrage of anger, shame, and relentless emotional pressure. Her older brother, Azar Jr., was especially vocal. He told her that she had brought disgrace upon the family, that her relationship with Salman had dishonored them, that their reputation, built over years of hard work and social standing in the Southall community, was now at risk. And for what? A refugee? Someone who, in their view, had nothing to offer but scandal? Samira's mother, Irshad, said little. But her silence spoke volumes. There were no comforting words, no gestures of protection. If anything, she reinforced the growing narrative that Samira had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. The atmosphere in the house shifted dramatically. What had once been a place of routine and quiet obedience became a pressure cooker. Conversations became interrogations. Her decisions were no longer her own. Her phone was monitored. Her comings and goings were questioned. And yet, despite the emotional siege around her, Samira refused to recant. She continued to support Salman and held firmly to her belief that she had the right to choose her partner. Despite the weight of tradition pressing down on her shoulders, Samira clung to a hope rooted not in naivety, but in principle. She believed in love, not as a fantasy, but as a right. A right that should not be negotiated through caste, bloodlines, or male approval. Even as the threats escalated, she remained patient, giving her family the benefit of the doubt. She imagined a future where time would cool tempers, where her father would forgive, her brother would relent, and her mother would embrace her again. In Samira's world, love wasn't rebellion. It was the bridge between two cultures, two worlds. She believed that love, in the end, would be enough. But her family wasn't waiting for time to heal. They weren't trying to reconcile. They weren't hoping for peace. They were planning, quietly, collectively. Not a conversation passed without someone invoking shame. Not a day went by without someone reminding her that she had crossed a line she could not uncross. While Samira was waiting for understanding, her family was building resentment. Not just against her, but against the idea that a woman could choose. Into this volatile atmosphere came her cousin, Imran Muhammad, known within the family by the alias Kashif Rana. A teenager reportedly from Norway, he had come to stay with the Nazirs in what was supposed to be a family visit. But what he walked into was a household already gripped by fury. And rather than be a voice of reason or even silent neutrality, Imran mirrored the mindset around him. He listened as her brother Azar and her father spoke of honor. He heard the whispered tones in the kitchen, the language of consequence, and instead of resisting it, he absorbed it. He didn't ask questions. He didn't challenge the narrative. He aligned himself with it completely, as if Samira's death was a duty that had to be fulfilled, and he would help deliver it. By this point, the home had ceased to be a refuge. It became a theater of psychological warfare. Every glance was a warning, every silence a tactic. Her brother's demands were loud and explicit. End it with Salman or face the outcome. Her father's threats were sharp, veiled at first, then direct. He told her that if she defied them, blood would follow, that there would be no future with Salman, only punishment. Her mother, Irshad, said nothing, no reassurance, no protest, just the cold presence of a woman who had chosen tradition over her own daughter's life. Still, Samira did not give in. She endured it all. Even as the walls of her home began to feel like a prison, she clung to her independence with silent strength. She continued to speak to Salman through stolen phone calls, quiet messages, brief glimmers of connection. In those moments, she reminded him that her love hadn't faded, that her spirit hadn't broken, that even surrounded by hostility, she remained steadfast. Her will did not bend. What she displayed during those final weeks was not just courage. It was defiance in its purest form. On April 23, 2005, everything came to an end. Just hours before her death, Samira Nazir and Salman Muhammad made one last attempt at reconciliation. They arranged to meet with Samira's mother, Irshad, away from the family home, hoping, perhaps, that distance might soften the confrontation. But Irshad refused to engage with them. The meeting never took place. Instead, Azar Nazir Jr. instructed Samira to return home. It was framed as a normal request, a return to routine. But it wasn't. Waiting inside the house were her brother, her mother, and her father. The trap had been set. The argument began as it always did, with accusations, raised voices, and ultimatums. Once again, they confronted her about Salman. Once again, she refused to submit. Samira was ambushed in the hallway of her home. She was restrained by her brother and cousin and attacked without mercy. For nearly 2 hours, she was beaten and stabbed. 18 separate wounds were inflicted. Her throat was slashed. Her hair was cut. Her body was bound with a scarf and dragged across the floor. The violence was so loud, so relentless, that it couldn't be contained within the walls of the Nazir household. The sound of screams, thuds, and pleading echoed into the street, drawing the attention of concerned neighbors. One neighbor, alarmed by the commotion, approached the front door, just in time to see a bloodied hand reach out from inside. It was Samira's, a final desperate attempt to escape. But before help could arrive, the door swung open. Standing there was her father, Azar Nazir Sr., calm, composed, and deliberate. With chilling ease, he brushed off the neighbor's concern. "She's having a fit," he said. The phrase, typically used to describe a seizure or emotional breakdown, was meant to deceive. to dismiss the horror behind the door as nothing more than a medical episode. With that, he closed the door, cutting off the only chance Samira had for rescue. It wasn't just a lie. It was the final act of control, and it sealed her fate. What made the attack even more horrifying was not just the brutality, but who witnessed it. The brutal homicide unfolded in full view of Samira Nazir Jr.'s young children who were present in the home that day. They saw their aunt pinned down, stabbed, and dragged lifeless through the hallway. They heard her screams, her pleas, and her final words. The trauma inflicted on them remains unspeakable. A legacy of silence, confusion, and fear that no child should have to carry, but in the defense of Samira's family, it will serve as a future warning to them. Before we continue, take a moment to reflect on what you've heard so far. Samira's story is not just a chapter from the past. It's a mirror reflecting the ongoing realities faced by many women around the world. Caught between love and tradition. Silenced by those meant to protect them. If this story has moved you, even slightly, don't let it end here. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to our channel for more true stories that expose injustice, challenge silence, and honor the voices we've lost. Your engagement can help ensure that Samira's story and others like hers are never forgotten. Now let's continue. Inside the house, Samira's mother said nothing. She didn't intervene. No one called for help. No ambulance was summoned. No one lifted a hand to save her. It was as if everyone had agreed, whether in words or silence, that this was the price she had to pay. As the attack reached its peak, Samira turned to her mother and uttered the final words she would ever speak. "You are not my mother anymore." It was a cry of pain, of betrayal, of final separation from the very person she had once believed would shield her. The house was quiet again. But the silence this time was different. It wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of something irreversible. The motive was clear. The method was brutal. The message was chilling. Samira had wanted love. Her family had wanted control. And now, she was gone. Neighbors decided to call 911. When the call finally came through, officers from the Metropolitan Police arrived swiftly at the Nazir residence on Clarence Street. What they found inside the home was not just tragic, it was harrowing. The scene that awaited them was one of methodical violence and cold-blooded calculation. The illusion of a quiet, respectable family home had shattered. The brutality was not chaotic, it was deliberate. Inside the house, two individuals were still present. Her older brother, Samira Nazir, and her younger cousin, Imran Mohammed, also known by the alias Kashif Rana. Both were covered in blood. Neither made any attempt to escape the scene. The weapon, a kitchen knife, was recovered nearby. The two young men were arrested on the spot for Samira's murder. But as police began to collect statements and piece together the details, they quickly realized this wasn't just a case of domestic violence. This was something much more disturbing. Equally alarming was the role of the adults in the house. Samira Nazir Sr., Samira's father, had been present during the attack. Multiple neighbors later told police that they had heard prolonged screaming coming from the house. Screams so loud and distressing that one neighbor approached the front door. That neighbor reportedly saw a bloodied hand reach out from inside. When they knocked, Azhar Sr. answered. Calmly, he told them Samira was having a fit and shut the door in their face. No attempt was made to seek help. Investigators believed Azhar Sr. had participated in restraining Samira, holding her down as his son and nephew carried out the fatal attack. At least two witness accounts suggested he physically prevented her from fleeing, dragging her back inside. Despite the seriousness of these claims, no immediate charges were filed against him, due in part to the complexities of gathering admissible evidence and familial silence in the home. He was, however, arrested and interviewed as part of the investigation, but later released on bail pending further inquiry. Azhar Sr. left the country. He fled the UK and traveled to Pakistan, where he reportedly died under unclear circumstances shortly before the main trial began. This sudden exit raised significant concerns among prosecutors. British police never confirmed his death independently. There was no verifiable death certificate, no repatriation, no public record accessible to confirm the date or cause of death. The family informed authorities that he had died, but many within law enforcement believed it was an orchestrated disappearance, part of a broader attempt to evade justice. Given the gravity of the crime and the coordinated silence within the household, suspicion ran deep. His absence left a gaping hole in the courtroom narrative. While Azhar Jr. and Imran Muhammad were convicted, the man who may have played a central role in enabling, assisting, or even initiating the killing never faced trial. To this day, his full involvement remains officially unproven but deeply suspected. What is known is this: on the day Samira Nazir was killed, her father was present. He stood at the doorway while she bled. He spoke to neighbors, he watched her die, and then he disappeared. Detectives began conducting interviews with family members, neighbors, and, most critically, Salman Muhammad, the man Samira had loved and planned to marry. When police reached him, Salman was devastated. His grief was compounded by horror. He had known that Samira's family disapproved of their relationship. He had been threatened, but he had never imagined this. In his statement, Salman described the confrontation that took place in March 2005, when Samira had brought him home to meet her family. He recalled how her father had flown into a rage, how he had brandished a knife, and how he had been forced to leave the house under threat. It was also during that time, Salman said, that Samira's brother, Azhar Jr., issued a direct warning. If the relationship continued, there would be consequences. Salman told detectives that Samira had later confided in him. Her father had said he would rather kill her than let her marry him. Despite the threats, Samira had refused to give up. With Salman's testimony, police were able to confirm what they already suspected. This was a premeditated killing, rooted in control and so-called family honor. Samira's decision to choose her own partner had been treated as a crime by her relatives. The idea that she could defy arranged marriage, fall in love with someone outside their caste and nationality, and marry without permission had been seen by her family not as independence, but as shame. The Crown Prosecution Service swiftly brought homicide charges against Azhar Nazir and Imran Muhammad. The evidence was overwhelming. Blood evidence, witness testimony, the presence of the children, the obstruction of neighbors. All of it pointed to a crime that had been planned and carried out with full awareness by the accused. Public reaction was swift and emotional. News of Samira Nazir's killing spread across the UK. Headlines highlighted the cruelty of the act, but also the larger context, honor-based violence, a term still not widely understood by many in Britain. Samira's case became one of the most visible examples of this form of abuse, where family reputation is prioritized over the rights, autonomy, and life of a woman. Community leaders, women's rights organizations, and British Pakistani advocates spoke out. Many noted that Samira's case was not isolated. It fit into a troubling pattern of women coerced into silence, threatened into obedience, or killed when they tried to break free. One of the most prominent voices to emerge was Nazir Afzal, a British Pakistani Crown prosecutor who had been sounding the alarm about underreported honor crimes. Samira's death, he argued, should be a turning point in how law enforcement and the legal system addressed these cases. He would later go on to lead major prosecutions in similar crimes and advocate for systemic reforms across the UK. In the weeks that followed her demise, Samira was laid to rest. But there was a bitter irony. Her funeral was arranged and conducted by the very people responsible for her death. Salman was advised by police not to attend, both for his safety and due to the likelihood of confrontation. He grieved in private. The woman he had hoped to build a life with had been taken from him in the most violent way possible. Back at Clarence Street, police continued to gather evidence. Police uncovered chilling signs. During a forensic sweep of the Nazir household, officers discovered covert listening devices hidden in rooms, believed to have been installed by the family to monitor conversations. Investigators suspected these devices were used to track Samira's communications and movements, particularly as tensions escalated in the weeks before her death. Their presence pointed to a premeditated strategy of control, suggesting that the family was surveilling her as they deliberated over how to handle her decision to marry Salman. This finding helped prosecutors establish that what happened on April 23, 2005, was not a spontaneous argument gone too far, but the culmination of weeks of planning and emotional isolation. What they were building was more than a homicide case. It was a cultural reckoning. The officers understood that this case could not be viewed in isolation. It was not enough to simply label it homicide. This was about gender, control, and systemic silence. And now the courts would have to decide, would the law see it the same way? The road to justice had begun. The courtroom would become the next battleground. There, Samira's voice, cut short in life, would finally be heard in full. When the trial of Samira Nazir and Imran Mohammed began at the Old Bailey, the facts were already painfully clear. The question was not whether they had ended Samira Nazir's life, but why. What emerged during the proceedings was not only a tragic loss, but a disturbing insight into how far some are willing to go to protect what they call family honor. The two defendants, Samira Nazir, then 30, and his younger relative, Imran Mohammed, who was just in his late teens at the time, stood accused of taking part in a violent act that resulted in Samira's death. The Crown Prosecution Service laid out its case in stark terms, that Samira's refusal of arranged marriage proposals and her plan to marry a partner of her own choosing had brought shame in the eyes of her family, and that they had responded with extreme and calculated force. Meanwhile, in the courtroom, Samira Nazir Jr. attempted to minimize his involvement. He claimed he arrived home to find his cousin attacking Samira and had merely tried to intervene. But forensic analysis told a different story. Blood spatter patterns on Azar's clothing and skin indicated he had been in direct proximity during the stabbing. One neighbor also testified that they saw Azar drag Samira back inside by her hair after she tried to escape. His explanation quickly unraveled. Together, the evidence, the listening devices, the physical forensic findings, and eyewitness accounts painted a grim picture. This wasn't a moment of lost control. It was a calculated act, carried out by those she trusted most. The verdict was announced on July 14, 2006. Samira Nazir was found guilty of taking his sister's life and was sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 20 years before eligibility for parole. Imran Mohammed, still a teenager at the time, was also found responsible and sentenced to a minimum of 10 years in custody. The sentences sent a clear signal. No cultural belief, no matter how deeply held, could ever excuse an act of this nature. The legal system stood firm. Personal freedom must be protected, even in the face of family pressure. Samira was brave enough to speak her truth. She chose love. She chose freedom, and for that, she paid with her life. Let her voice echo beyond the walls that betrayed her. Speak up. Educate others about honor-based abuse. Support those who feel trapped between tradition and choice. Because every time we stay silent, another Samira risks being erased. Like, share, and subscribe to help bring awareness to stories that must be heard. Together, we can turn remembrance into resistance, and silence into justice.